So, so the last topic that we are going to talk about is, it's an important one, but it's a sensitive one. Okay. We're going to talk about vaccinations and the problem of people voluntarily not vaccinating, choosing not to vaccinate. So vaccines, and that documentary that I posted called The Vaccine War, outstanding documentary, really lays out some very important history and facts about the development of vaccines and then this slow shift in attitudes towards vaccines that started around the 90s. And so I've got some of the, I've distilled some of the facts from that documentary that I'm going to share with you today as well. So vaccines have always been considered one of the greatest shining achievements of medicine, right? So if you look at, since the development of the earliest vaccines till today, vaccines on average have added about 30 years to people's lifespans, right? So life expectancies have dramatically lengthened since vaccines have started. There's about 16 diseases that are preventable by vaccination. Okay, 16 diseases. 14 of those diseases affect infants and young children, while the other two are more adolescent and teenagers. So, and vaccines have been extremely effective. We've gotten very close to eradicating some diseases that used to ravage societies, right? So smallpox, the last reported case of smallpox anywhere in the world was about 1979. So we're cautiously calling that disease eradicated. Polio is very close to being eradicated, but polio has been seen, continues to be found in certain places in the world. But we've reduced the rates of these vaccine-preventable diseases dramatically. Okay? So it's been a very big success. And we've prevented lots of deaths, and we've also saved a tremendous amount of money in terms of not having to treat people for diseases. So the types of diseases, like I said, we have 16 diseases that we can prevent through vaccination, okay? And the majority of those have a very high impact on infants and children. Okay? We continue to develop new vaccines. So the HPV virus, human papillomavirus, was a fairly recently developed vaccine. And the HPV virus is implicated in contributing to or causing about 70% of cervical cancers. Right? So this is the first time that we have a vaccine that can actually prevent cancer. So we continue to develop new vaccines and improve people's health that way. Now, hopefully, at some point, you have learned about the vaccine schedule. So this is the current vaccine schedule for age from birth to 4 to 6 years old. And then there's a couple of vaccines that are given during adolescence. So we start to vaccinate, or we encourage vaccination immediately at birth with the hepatitis B vaccine. The next set of vaccinations happen at age 2 months, right? So we get vaccinated for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 diseases at age 2 months, again at 4 months, and then 6 months, and then usually again at 15 months, right? And at 4 to 6 years old. So this vaccine schedule is not decided on arbitrarily, right? We don't vaccinate for these diseases with no reason behind the timing. So the introduction of the vaccine is timed with two things in mind. The first is the timing of exposure, susceptibility and exposure. Okay? And then the second one is the critical periods of when contracting the disease would be the most life-threatening. Okay? So we're balancing age and maturity of the immune system, right, which is going to affect the ability to create the immunity, with when children are exposed to something and when the exposure would be the most dangerous for them. Okay? Now, for example, one disease, hepatitis B, that is, if you listen to comments that are against vaccination, there's a couple of different things that you hear over and over again. And one of the things that you will hear is about the hepatitis B vaccine. And the thing that you'll hear the most is, why do I have to vaccinate my baby, my newborn baby, against a sexually transmitted disease? Okay? You will hear that universally. And the reason why the hepatitis B vaccine is given at birth is because mothers who have hepatitis B, the baby is the most vulnerable at birth because they're exposed to maternal blood. Okay? So and we time vaccination and we create vaccination policy with everyone's health in mind, to protect everyone, particularly the most vulnerable people in society. So hepatitis B at birth is encouraged because it's the time of great vulnerability in terms of exposure. Okay? Not that your newborn is going to engage in high-risk sex, obviously. All right? Now, with that said, for a woman who knows that she is hepatitis B negative, to delay vaccinating her child for hepatitis B, that's perfectly reasonable. That's a perfectly reasonable decision. But what you will find with this vaccine debate is that the fight is bigger than the logic behind the fight. Okay? That there is strong statements and dismissive statements on both sides of this debate. Okay? And what's left unexplored is sort of the basic science and research and reason behind things. Okay? That could actually help people make these decisions. Okay? Yeah?
I once heard that some of these hepatitis B specifically is given because in this age, 0 to 6, you still get these kids to the pediatrician at the age where they are teenagers and are at risk, and those, especially those teenagers who are at high risk, they don't show up in the doctor's office anymore, and so then it is hard to get them at that age. But school age, because schools also have to check your immunization record, you can still get them.
And that's a very good point. That the vaccinations, some of them are timed because of the likelihood of insurance coverage, right? And visits to the doctor, absolutely, right? So there's a lot that goes into crafting these public health policies. And unless you understand what is behind it, telling people if you don't vaccinate your kid against Hep B, you're stupid, is not helpful. And telling people if you vaccinate your child against a sexually transmitted disease, you're stupid, right? I mean, those are not helpful arguments. So what's important is to actually look at what's behind these public health policies and helping people, arming them with information so that they can make really well-informed decisions, right? Yeah?
I know some of the pediatricians that work in my hospital will also inform parents that up until about 30 years ago, we weren't even doing a Hep B vaccine, so they could have parents or other people watching them who could possibly transmit the disease to them as well, grandparents or otherwise. So especially because they're vulnerable infants, so that's the idea of getting them started earlier.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of good reasons to get your your newborn baby vaccinated for Hep B. You know. So let me tell you a little bit that you will hear a lot more of if you decide to watch this documentary. So there was this growing, so vaccines are a wonderful success. There was this growing distrust of vaccines that started around the 90s. And what happened that really triggered a lot of what we see today in terms of the pushback against vaccines happened as a result of a scientific paper that was published in 1998 by a man named Andrew Wakefield. So he was a gastroenterologist from the UK, and he published a study in The Lancet that looked at 12 children and compared a variety of problems to the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. And one of the things was autism. And he concluded that there was an increased risk of autism in children who get the MMR as it was available at that time. So it was published in The Lancet, and it stimulated a lot of panic around the MMR vaccine and connections to autism. Andrew Wakefield later was found to have falsified much of his data, right? And The Lancet retracted this article, and he lost his medical license. Okay? What was found was that he was paid by a group that was trying to sue a vaccine manufacturer. So he was paid by a group that was trying to get money from a lawsuit, and he was paid to produce some evidence to support their case. So what really stimulated much of what we see today in terms of the anti-vaccine debate started with a completely fraudulent study. Right? Andrew Wakefield is still talking about vaccines and autism. He just came out with a documentary that he produced himself called Vaxxed, V-A-X-X-E-D. I thought about showing you the trailer, but I didn't want to get angry. And it's very, very disturbing because you have medical professionals perpetuating these ideas, you know. So I actually found out about this Vaxxed movie because one of my Facebook friends from high school, who's now a physician, posted it as like, this is a wonderful documentary to watch and learn about vaccination. So and what it really comes down to is there's a great distrust from the pharmaceutical company, which is completely well-founded. Okay? And there is this belief that the pharmaceutical company is in bed with the CDC and the FDA, and they're suppressing research and they're suppressing data, when in fact, the vaccines have been studied, particularly MMR has been studied. There's been about 12 different studies that show no increased risk of autism with the MMR. Right? There's several studies that came out of Denmark that because they collect tremendous amounts of data on their general health, their public health care system. And they looked at the rates of autism before the MMR was introduced, and then after the MMR was introduced, no difference. Okay? Another thing that's commonly targeted with the vaccine debate are the additives to vaccines. Right? There's a mercury-based additive called thimerosal that was targeted as being the cause of this autism, right? And for a while there, thimerosal was taken out of the vaccine. And again, studies that looked at periods of time where thimerosal was in the vaccine and periods of time where it wasn't in the vaccine have shown no difference in autism rates. Okay? And this has been replicated. The data has been replicated. The information has been replicated. In 19, let me get the number. One second. Let me get the 1982. There was a woman named Barbara Lowe Fisher in 1982 whose son was harmed by the diphtheria vaccine. She, as a result, she started this organization that was a watchdog organization for vaccine injury. And they actually lobbied and forced the diphtheria vaccine manufacturers to produce a much safer version of the vaccine, which was a wonderful campaign. Her efforts and her organization's efforts established a vaccine court, right, in this country to hear vaccine injury cases and potentially compensate people. And their organization has completely refuted any connection between the MMR and autism. Okay? So even individuals who are interested in protecting people from vaccine injury have stated that there's no connection. Now, there are some misunderstandings, common misunderstandings about vaccinations that you hear that is used to support the choice not to vaccinate children. And I'm doing this because you will hear it and you should have a response to it. As a healthcare professional, it's very important that you act as an educator for your patients and their families. So, some of the things that you'll hear. Polio and other serious diseases are not present in the United States anymore, so we don't need to vaccinate our children for them anymore. So, polio, it's true. There hasn't been a reported case of polio in the United States for a very, very long time. But there are places in the world where polio still exists, and it is well believed that if polio somehow got reintroduced into the United States, it would spread like wildfire among unvaccinated children and individuals. Okay? So, and our world is getting smaller and smaller since international travel is very, very easy. So, just because a disease has not been around for a long time does not mean that it can't come back, and that it's and diseases that are allowed to run through individuals also evolve and get harder and harder to treat. Okay? So vaccinating a population and reducing the occurrence helps prevent diseases from getting worse and worse. Okay? Vaccines cause injury, autism, neurological injury, etc. Now, what's believed to be true is that, so a vaccine is a drug. A vaccine is a drug. And the guiding principle behind taking a drug or giving a drug is that the risk of no treatment is greater than the risk of treatment. Okay? That's why we give drugs. If we decide to give a drug, it's because the risk of no treatment is greater than the risk of treatment. So as a drug, vaccines carry risks, right? And for some individuals, the risks may be higher than others, depending on genetics, depending on allergies, depending on a variety of things. But what the research has shown is that at a population level, the risk of injury from a vaccine is much smaller than the risk of illness from the disease that the vaccine prevents. Okay? So anybody tells you I don't vaccinate my children because there are risks associated with vaccines, you explain to them that every medication you will ever take carries a risk, you know? This is a really common one. The current vaccine schedule overwhelms a child's immune system. This is one that you hear over and over again. You heard it from physicians who happen to also be running for president, right? I don't even want to talk about our current president. So the idea is vaccines are safe, but we're probably giving too many. We're probably overwhelming a child's immune system. Okay? So the 14 vaccine preventable diseases that we give children, infants and children, carry with them about 20 antigens. Okay? It's about a total of 20 antigens that we introduce. In any given day, a child is exposed to hundreds or if not thousands of antigens just in being alive in the world. Okay? So the antigens, the number of antigens we introduce in the current vaccine schedule, we could triple it. We could triple the number, and it would not even be close to the number of antigens that we encounter every single day. Okay? So there is no basis in believing that we are overwhelming children's immune systems. So I talked about this one. Why do they want to vaccinate my newborn baby from a transmitted disease, sexually transmitted disease? This one. If the vaccines work, then other parents shouldn't worry about my choice not to vaccinate. This is a snarky one, right? But you'll hear it. So vaccines are drugs, which means they carry risk. And vaccines are drugs, which means that no drug is 100% effective, right? So no drug is 100% effective 100% of the time. So vaccines greatly reduce the risk of getting a disease. But it doesn't mean that you can't get a disease that you've been vaccinated for. Okay? There's always a risk of that. But if a critical number of people in a population get vaccinated, the occurrence of the disease goes down. And along with the vaccine, that is what protects everybody. Okay? And as soon as you get large numbers of people opting out of vaccination, the occurrence of the disease increases and everybody's risk increases. Okay? Based on my research into the issue of vaccines, they contain dangerous additives and are an unnecessary risk to my child. Again, the number of additives, so the reason why you have additives to vaccines, some of them preserve the vaccine, but some of them actually help stimulate the immune system in a way that reduces the need for more antigen. Okay? So the additives, they are constantly being tested, and so far they have not been shown to be dangerous on a wide-scale basis. If you get a vaccine for an illness, you may contract that illness and pass it on to others. Okay. There are less than 5, I think it's only 2, vaccines in the entire schedule where you have a live organism in the vaccine. So the varicella, chickenpox, and rotavirus. MMR? Which one in the, is it rubella? They all are MMR? It's just rubella,
It
right?
used to be the flu when it was measles.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so I think it is rubella in that mix. So those are the only live organisms. The rest are dead organisms. You can't get sick from a dead organism, okay? You cannot, with the exception of rotavirus, and I'll talk about rotavirus in a second, if you get a vaccine, you cannot give that disease to somebody else, okay? You can't give that disease to somebody else. With rotavirus, because it's a liquid that the baby drinks, and it's a living organism, that organism will end up in the stool. So you don't want anybody who's immune compromised to handle that stool. That's the only time where an organism actually can, from an inoculation, can get past to somebody. Okay? That's it. You're not going to get measles from somebody who just got vaccinated for measles. That's not going to happen. Okay? I don't need to vaccinate my children because they'll be protected from herd immunity. Enough people think like that, herd immunity falls apart, right? So the idea of herd immunity is what I was describing before, that if you have a critical number of people all getting vaccinated for a disease, the occurrence of the disease goes down, exposure goes down, and the rates of that disease go down. And what that does, that herd immunity, helps protect individuals who cannot get vaccinated. Okay? Because there are people who, because of age, there are children that are too young to get vaccinated for some diseases. Okay? And because of the presence of other conditions, they can't get vaccinated. Right? People who are immune compromised can't get certain vaccinations. But they're protected from herd immunity if enough of us are all getting vaccinated. So we have clearly seen that one break down because we get measles outbreaks all the time now, pertussis outbreaks, right? Whooping cough, right? We're starting to see outbreaks of diseases that were 10, 20 years ago we weren't seeing at all. Okay. Now, finally, I really want to plug a book by a woman called Eula Biss. It's called On Immunity. It's a wonderful book. It's really beautifully written. She's a wonderful writer. And basically, she's a writer who had her first child, and she wanted to really understand what this whole vaccine debate was about, so that she could make decisions for her own children. She's an intelligent woman who pretty much believed in vaccines. But I can tell you personally, like the first time I took my oldest child to get the MMR, I was like, really? Is this okay? You know, because it's your child. And thankfully, I had a pediatrician who was brilliant and told me the facts. But you know, there is this knee-jerk reaction to want to protect your kids from everything, even the boogeyman. You know, so she did her research, and what she found all the things that I'm describing to you, and she wrote a book about it. And what she also talked about, which is a really important issue, is that particularly in our country, there are two groups of children who are not getting vaccinated. There are children who are unvaccinated, and then there are children who are under-vaccinated. The unvaccinated children have parents who are electing not to vaccinate their child. The children who are under-vaccinated are children who are from families that have low economic resources and don't and see doctors irregularly, and their parents can't take off work to take them to their well visits, and so they don't get the complete vaccination schedule. Okay? Now, the children whose parents are electing not to vaccinate their children, on average, if you look at the demographics, these are generally people who are middle class to upper middle class to upper class. They have more education and they have far more resources. If you look at the children who are under-vaccinated, they have little to very little resources. And so what you have in this situation is the most privileged groups in our society creating a situation that compromises the least privileged people in our society. Okay? So it's more than just a healthcare issue. It's actually really a moral issue. And it's something that, you know, we all need to understand and better inform our patients about. Okay? Now, finally, I'll leave you with this graphic. So, this graphic shows the occurrences over time, over the last few years, of vaccine-preventable illnesses and outbreaks throughout the world. Just in case you thought polio was not a problem, you know, there's certainly places in the world where there are. So these diseases are preventable by vaccines, and we should be preventing them. Okay. That's all I have for you. Anybody have any questions?
I just
Yeah.
have
Go ahead.
I just have a few kind of like more about the advice that patients can give. What about parents? What about sort of illnesses that are seen as benign, like chickenpox, like both of
Yeah. And that's an important question. So the question is about illnesses that are thought to be benign and unnecessary to vaccinate your children. That's a sticky issue, right? So I had chickenpox when I was little. There wasn't a chickenpox vaccine when I was little. Measles, some people view measles like that, you know. That's a little bit more of a gray area, and the best argument to encourage parents to vaccinate against those illnesses is again more of a societal one. That, like, you know, your child might be able to handle chickenpox, but somebody they go to school with may not be able to. You know, my mom's accountant, I was talking to him. He's got a 2-year-old son with leukemia, and he can't get vaccinated, you know. But he goes to school. He goes to preschool, whatever it was. You know, there are children who can't, who will be adversely affected. It's not benign for them, and so you know, encouraging parents to get vaccinated in that way for those reasons. Yeah.
What do you say to parents who claim, like, autism basically didn't exist when I was younger? Like, I never saw an incidence of autism, and yet now it's prevalent. Therefore, it must be attributed to him.
What you can tell those people is that the rates of autism have increased over time, but over and over again, it has not been connected to, it has not been connected to vaccinations. And so it must be something else. And as long as we keep focusing on vaccinations, we're not going to find the reason.
Research the other thing.
Exactly. We're not going to find why there's more autism. Yeah.